Good morning, everybody. I'm Tim O'Brien. I'm the senior executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion, the commentary arm of Bloomberg News, and this is our weekly politics live stream. As you could imagine, we're going to talk about the government shutdown today, what it means for all of you as voters, as citizens, as community members, as family members, and as human beings. And joining me to help sort through all of this are two of our esteemed political columnists, Nia-Malika Henderson and David Drucker. They've both written extensively about the shutdown before it began, while it was happening, and now as it looks that the curtain is finally coming down on the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. We're going to try to divide this conversation into two baskets. What does winning, quote unquote, and losing, quote unquote, mean when you have something as disruptive and potentially apocalyptic as a government shutdown? And then how should you think about a government shutdown in terms of political messaging and policy making, which tend to collide when legislators engage in this kind of fisticuffs? So let's start with the winning and losing piece of this, Nia. Are there any winners and losers in this, clear winners and losers in this, or is it more nuanced than that?
Well, listen, I'm just going to say I'm really glad this is coming to an end. I was worried about travel, Thanksgiving at the airports, and I think that was one of the pressure points that Democrats felt in terms of why they finally looked for an off-ramp and decided 8 Democrats decided to join with Republicans in the shutdown. I have long believed that even in losing, there was a way that Democrats could win this, right? Their task was Herculean. They had to change Donald Trump's mind. They had to change Republicans' mind, both in the Congress and the Senate, in terms of healthcare and these subsidies that are making Obamacare much more affordable for average Americans. So that was their task. That was very hard. So in caving, as some people say they did, I think one of the ways they win is that they have this message out now about Republicans. The message being that Republicans don't really care about affordability. They don't really care about the rising cost of healthcare. And listen, 20 or so million Americans are getting these notices in the mail about these price hikes. So now if you listen to people like Mike Johnson, he is now saying, listen, we now have a plan around healthcare. He said last week, or he said last night, that he's got a notebook full of ideas in terms of healthcare. What we have seen so far is that issues around affordability, it's a winning message for Democrats. We saw that last week in these, which we talked about with these elections across the country. And so I think in sort of losing this immediate battle around the government shutdown, that they win a kind of messaging war around the party that is on your side in terms of lowering prices and in terms of affordability. And Republicans, on the other hand, particularly and most importantly, Donald Trump, he's got his head in the sand in terms of affordability. He said last night on one of the cable news programs that this is the best economy ever. Ask average Americans, and they don't feel that way at all. So that's kind of the way I look at the shutdown. Democrats, I think, definitely rallied their base around the government shutdown. They stood up to Trump. Are Democrats, sort of rank and file and progressive Democrats, angry now, particularly at Schumer? Sure, but I think once the dust settles, this will be a victory that they can build on going into the midterms.
David, Nia was citing Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, as having notebooks full of ideas about healthcare. I'm reminded of Paul Ryan, who was an authentic student of healthcare policy, who in Trump 1.0 struggled to come up with a cohesive healthcare policy that could move through the Congress. We'll come to that, but let's focus on this issue of winners and losers. As you look at this broadly, this shutdown moment, do you think there are clear winners and losers?
Well, it's funny. I could say that there are clear winners and losers, but the players involved seem to be not of one mind about that, right? I mean, it's my analysis that the Democrats did something rather remarkable. They're exiting the shutdown with political high ground. And I don't know if I'm saying quite they're winning, but they're exiting the shutdown with the political high ground despite instigating the shutdown. In every shutdown in the modern era that I've either covered as a journalist or read about, the instigating party always loses because voters find shutting down the government as a leverage to achieve a policy aim to be an illegitimate form of political combat. And Democrats used their minority in the Senate because they don't have a majority in the Senate or the House. And of course, they don't have the White House as leverage to force Republicans to extend Obamacare subsidies. This was something, come heck or high water, that Republicans and the president were never going to agree to do, ever, with a shutdown being used to force them to do it. And yet Democrats managed to put themselves in the driver's seat when it
Oh man. David Drucker froze.
majorities, unlike previous majorities and presidents, the Republicans became active players in the shutdown, muddying the waters, right? The president was using the shutdown to fire workers, not just furlough them. He was using the shutdown to furlough them and tell them they weren't going to get back pay. He was using the shutdown to manipulate all sorts of government agencies as he saw fit, when the normal course of action is for the offended party, the majority party, to say, hey, we just want to open the government. We're doing everything we can to mitigate this shutdown. And the Republicans didn't do that. And so they exit this shutdown not in the driver's seat, not without the benefit that usually accrues to the majority party that didn't cause the shutdown and never wanted the shutdown. And now Democrats find themselves in a position where they caught the car, but they refuse to accept that they caught it. Because what they wanted, what they got it into their heads thinking was that when this was going well for them, that Republicans and the president were going to capitulate if they just fought hard enough. But there's one thing fighting hard enough never accomplishes. It never accomplishes doing something that math is required to do. They don't have the numbers, and no matter how hard they fought, they weren't going to win a policy victory, but they did manage to win a political victory. And if they'll allow themselves to accept that victory, that's something that they can build
on. So is a lesson here then, in an era in which one party controls both houses of Congress and the White House, and you have a president who's running roughshod over congressional prerogatives, that actually engaging in a government shutdown, if your goal is clearly defined, is smart politics, David?
Well, I think it's bad politics. What Trump should have done, for instance, let's take this recent court action with SNAP payments, right? I mean, this is government assistance.
So you're saying it was bad politics for the Dems to do it, or for Trump to allow it to happen?
It was bad politics for Trump to engage in the shutdown as an active participant.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, when we look at these SNAP payments that are being held up currently, the courts told Trump to pay the benefits, meaning his administration, to release the money. And he argued with the courts against doing so. This makes him an active participant in the fallout from the shutdown that impacts people adversely. He should have been begging the courts to give him an affirmative ruling to go and pay it, so that he could say, I don't know if I can pay these benefits because the Democrats shut down the government. Hopefully the courts will allow me to do it. But if you're wondering why you're not getting any SNAP assistance this week, it's their fault. I wish I could do it. Instead, Trump became the proactive figure in preventing benefits from going out. So it turned the politics of a shutdown on its head. One of the reasons why Americans tend not to like shutdowns, even if they like the policy aims the party that instigated the shutdown is moving for, is because they don't like what they have to give up in order to get there. They don't want to give up their benefits. They don't want air traffic to be snarled, right? They don't want if you're a government worker, to lose benefits or to lose back pay. And once Trump was using the shutdown for his own ends, then he became an active participant rather than an innocent bystander. I'll say one other thing on this, Tim. I think in retrospect, I'm not a genius here because it didn't occur to me in the beginning, but I think in retrospect, Speaker Mike Johnson's decision to keep the House out for several weeks, while I understand the goal was to prevent mixed messages from House Republicans, it prevented frustrated Republicans from pushing for a compromise. Ultimately, as it was another way in which Republicans looked like they were using the shutdown for their own ends, rather than being in Washington doing everything they could to get to work. We want to get to work. It's the Democrats that are preventing us from doing the people's business. And that's, another thing that I think helped Democrats end up in a position where, at the very least, they have the political high ground.
Nia, I wanna kind of zero in on something you said, and I think your argument, as I understand it, is that had the Democrats secured an extension of subsidies for Obamacare, that would have taken away a little bit of firepower around the affordability message heading into the midterm elections next year. Is that correct? Is that kind of where you see that?
I think that's absolutely true.
But let me follow up on that then, because I think where we end up with, though, and I don't disagree with that in theory, but I think we learned in the gubernatorial elections that just happened, and the New York mayoral election, and the other smaller elections that we're all keeping our eyes on, is that affordability was already a pretty salient issue for voters. And it was electricity prices in Virginia and New Jersey. It was housing affordability in New York. It was the sort of affordability was the tether that held these disparate campaign moments together, electoral moments together. So there was already some affordability momentum independent of healthcare that might have carried into the 2026 election. So what's been sacrificed along the way in maintaining the political momentum of affordability by not getting a solution to ACA support in this government shutdown is that millions of Americans are not going to be able to afford health care until another solution is found. So I get the idea that it's politically useful to the Democrats, but from a pure policymaking standpoint and for meeting the needs of voters who have to pay for health care they can't afford, it's a bit of a disaster.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think Americans who've paid attention to this last 40 days of the shutdown know who to place the blame on for that. It is Republicans who have let the ACA subsidies expire. It's going to be the Republicans who, listen, people in their own party. You think about Jeff Van Drew out of New Jersey. He is in a very Trumpy district. He's not even on the list of Republicans who Democrats are targeting to flip a seat in 2026. He is saying that Republicans have to do something about healthcare. He actually was for extending the subsidies for a year, which was Schumer's last offer. Marjorie Taylor Greene, the same thing. So they are the ones, if you listen to folks out of the Senate as well, the Kansas senator, he said there is some sort of healthcare plan that they are going to put on the floor side by side with whatever the Democrats want. So at this point, the onus, I think, really is going to be on the Republicans. And I think that was one of the victories from Democrats. They basically have rebranded in so many ways the Republicans as people who don't necessarily care about healthcare. And to David's point about SNAP, there was a sort of level of cruelty that emerged, I think, over these last 40 days from some of the things that Republicans and President Trump were trying to do. Furlough workers and say that they weren't even going to get paid. Of course, the SNAP benefits. Trump arguing that these SNAP beneficiaries, 42 million or so of them, shouldn't actually get their full benefits for November. And so I think, sure, there was this argument around affordability that we saw Democrats benefit from in these last elections, but it's turbocharged now, I think, because you're going to also see already, folks are getting these letters in the mail that their premiums are going to double. And so now the ball is in Republicans' court to kind of figure out how do they tackle this issue going forward, ahead of the midterms in November.
David, pick that up. I guess I'd like to ask that in an even slightly more abstracted way. When is it worth winning a messaging victory at the expense of a legislative victory when people's needs are on the table?
Well, when you're framing it in terms of public policy and what's good for voters, when we're talking about their quality of life, their ability to get ahead, then the whole point of politics is to facilitate that. So it's never worthwhile to sacrifice what's good for people to win a political victory. But I think that when you're engaged in electoral politics and when you're an elected official in a legislative body with divided government, especially, but even when you don't have divided government, there is what we call the old cliche, the art of the possible, right? We have a House, we have a Senate, we have a president, and they were all elected and they all have different opinions and they all have different levers of power. And sometimes you can't have everything you want. And so you have to make a calculation as to what is the best that you can get at this point in time, and then leave yourself room to come back for more. I mean, the way our system is designed to work is people win elections and they have either 2 years, 4 years, or 6 years to affect an agenda. And if people aren't happy, they make a change. And obviously within that period of time, there are battles that happen. And so, from the point of view of somebody who didn't like the Senate compromise led by a collection of centrist or moderate or pragmatic, if you will, Senate Democrats, you could say that compromise means that Obamacare subsidies are not going to be extended and people's healthcare premiums are going to rise exponentially. And therefore that compromise leaves people worse off. Or you could look at it like this. There were actually a number of detrimental developments that were going to impact affordability for everyday Americans, right? You had people that weren't going to get their food benefits. You had people that maybe had a job interview or are in sales and make a commission that need to fly all over the country every week that weren't going to be able to get there, to say nothing of being with your family on Thanksgiving. I'm a campaign reporter.
People not getting their paychecks.
Yeah, I see people in airports all the time that work in sales and marketing that their paychecks are dependent on the meetings that they're flying to, right? And there were a number of other government benefits or paychecks that weren't going to be doled out because people weren't going to be at work. And so these members made a calculation that the pain that was going to ensue immediately for the possibility of fixing one particular problem wasn't worth the risk. But the thing about our system is they now can go forward and make an argument that had we been in charge, we would have fixed everything. So put us in charge and everything will be fixed.
We'll manage your government better.
Yeah. And I think that what activists who are very committed to their point of view forget is that this isn't a zero-sum game and there isn't only one election left. And this isn't the only opportunity to fix things, right? I mean, our country's been around for almost 250 years and it's a constant, perpetual exercise of fixing problems and refining those fixes and then fixing new problems. And it just never ends. And this sort of I call it the end is nearism, Tim. The end is near. We've seen this on the right and the left. And if we don't fix this problem, we'll never, ever have an opportunity to do it ever again. And that's just simply not the case.
When in fact, like a house, we're always fixing things.
Yeah.
Nia, there are so many interesting personalities involved in here. Let's pick off a few of them, and I'll talk with both of you about them. But let's start with Chuck Schumer. I think I've got a more critical take on Schumer than you do, but I want to hear yours, and our audience should hear yours. But how do you think he emerges from this as the minority leader for Democrats in the Senate?
Listen, I think progressives in the House don't like Chuck Schumer. You saw Ro Khanna, for instance, say that he should step down. You have progressive activists who feel the same way. But listen, I think there is no alternative to Chuck Schumer in the Senate, and Democratic senators there are fine. You don't hear anyone in the Senate on the record, or really even off the record, calling for his ouster. Do I expect him to be around beyond 2026? Probably not, and that's more because he's getting up there.
He'll be with us at least till 2028, right? That's
Yeah,
when he faces
I
reelection.
think that's right, but I don't know that he is the minority leader after 2026. We'll see, right? There is a kind of shift towards this new generation. Dick Durbin, for instance, is stepping down. People are already sort of vying for his seat. But Chuck Schumer, I think he did about as good as he could. People like to compare folks on the scene now to Nancy Pelosi, but a lot of sort of Nancy Pelosi's victories came when she was in the majority, when she was the Speaker of the House, not when she was a minority leader. A lot of those victories obviously came when there was a Democratic president as well. Chuck Schumer, when he was the majority leader, had a much better record of achievement and accomplishment and wrangling his caucus, which was in some ways fractured. You had some folks in the caucus like Manchin and Sinema, and was able to get these big bills passed under Joe Biden. Things are a bit different now. Listen, he didn't make any friends back in March when he basically rolled without even trying to stand up to the Republicans, stand up to Donald Trump during the last possible government shutdown. And so here, I mean, he joined hands with Hakeem Jeffries in the House and did something fairly risky. And listen, he was playing chicken with people who don't mind crashing the car. That was the problem. And so he comes out now, and you have these 8 Democratic senators breaking ranks. Listen, I think there is anger in the caucus among Democratic senators at the people who broke ranks. But those are folks, many of them are not running for re-election, Jeanne Shaheen and Dick Durbin, for instance. And so I think once the smoke clears, progressives will still be upset and Schumer will still have a job.
I mean, I guess the argument is, vis-a-vis Pelosi, is that she knew how to crack the whip to keep her caucus in one place, and that Schumer is too gentle, a minority leader, and that he could have pulled these folks back into the fold. Again, though, this gets to the point of whether or not they actually could have gotten an extension of the Obamacare subsidies to begin with. But moving off of that, David, where does this leave John Thune, Mike Johnson, and Donald Trump?
Well, look, I mean, Republicans are the party in power in a midterm election, and it's all about how people feel about the president. I think the majority leader, John Thune, in the Senate has done a pretty good job, especially for a first-time leader at this level. I think House Speaker Mike Johnson, for the neophyte he was when he took the gavel, has done a pretty good job of holding his conference together, even though I think in retrospect it was an error, as I said, to keep the House out for so long. I think for Republicans, they have the same problem that Democrats and President Biden and Vice President Harris had in 2024. When people are concerned about something like the economy and feel it so viscerally, and they don't think the party in power is performing to the level that was responsible for the reason they hired them in the first place, when in fact you look at polling and you see that people don't think Trump is focused enough on that issue, let alone performing on that issue, they're just in a world of hurt. And Republicans are doubly squeezed because they can't break with the president ahead of next year's primaries because they need his endorsement. At the very least, they need to avoid his unendorsement. And so they're between a rock and a hard place. If they were smart, they would shed every piece of policy that they've been dealing with and start running bills and giving speeches about affordability and the economy and focus solely on that. And if they could convince Trump to junk his tariff agenda, they might stand a chance. But they're just in a very tight spot right now, in part because of normal historical political dynamics, but in part because of the unique qualities of this very mercurial president.
And looming over all of this is what the economy is going to do in the fourth quarter of this year and the first and second quarter of next year. There's a lot of macroeconomic signals around inflation, which is spiking, around joblessness, which is tenuous, trade issues tied to tariffs, and all of that, if that gets momentum, will make the government shutdown as a political factor probably look much less significant. Nia, do you see the Dems staying on message around affordability going forward, or will they do what the Dems always do and start scratching each other like a herd of cats?
Well, listen, I think you're going to see some of that in the near term around this government shutdown, this sort of anxiety about Chuck Schumer, anxiety about folding and caving too early to Republicans. But again, I think once that's clear, once they sort of get bored with the infighting and the fate of Chuck Schumer, I think they will stick to affordability because they have seen it as winning. And this isn't something that is rocket science when you think about politics. The economy is always center stage when you think about why people choose to vote the way they vote. Donald Trump knows this. That's why he's floating this idea of, oh, you're going to get $2,000 back from all the tariff money. That's likely not going to happen. But he knows that there is some anxiety out there, and he's looking for some sort of quick win to turn the tariffs into a win. Most Americans think his tariff policy is a bad idea. He's at about a 63% disapproval rating in terms of his handling of the economy. If you listen to MAGA podcasters, they are talking about this. They are talking about the idea that most Americans haven't really had any sort of boost from Donald Trump's policies. That's a real danger for him because if you think about it, people were in lockstep in the MAGA sphere as he was ascending to the White House for the second time. The idea was that he was going to turn people's economic fortunes around, and yet you have a president who seems to be much more focused on the ballroom, much more focused on foreign policy than domestic policy. And you have the MAGA sphere, people like Steve Bannon out there saying that he needs to focus more on the economy. But in doing that, Trump would be admitting so far that his policies haven't worked, and that's not the way that this president likes to operate.
David Drucker, Nia-Malika Henderson, thanks for joining Bloomberg Opinion's Politics live stream today. We've been talking about the government shutdown. We will all be back together to talk about something else going on in the carnival that is American politics today. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Tim O'Brien. I'm the Senior Executive Editor of Bloomberg Opinion. We'll see you again soon.